It's great. And you mentioned to me before we started that you've got a meeting later of possibly taking the roof off and putting a third story on. Is that actually a realistic option as an engineer? And I love the way that you guys are bringing the building into vision, because often you chat to churches or you look at their vision statements, the building is just a place where they work from, and it's not thought about. Well, hello and welcome to the Church Office podcast. My name is Gavin Smith, and it's a joy to welcome you today to this church administration, admin and ops podcast. We love talking about the ministry behind the scenes, and really looking forward to today's topic. We're going to be talking about buildings, and we're going to be chatting to Richard. But before we jump into the conversation, I just want to do a big shout out to Gavin at Church Suite and the team at Church Suite for sponsoring the podcast. They've kindly sponsored the podcast, supporting the work of ministry that we're doing with the church office, and we're thrilled to work in partnership with them. This is a great piece of software. Let me recommend it right from the start. This helps us to be effective, to be organized, to help us with rotas, with newcomers. There are so many different aspects and modules that Church Suite offer, which I would highly recommend. So please go and check it out at churchsuite.com. Promo finished. Richard, welcome to the podcast, my friend. Thanks for joining us.
No, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's great to have you. Richard's based at King's Cross Church in London, and when I've heard about Richard and the work that he's been doing and your background in sort of project management and stuff, I'm like, we need to chat to you, because you guys have been working hard, creating space in a quite a challenging place. I guess London is real estate is difficult, and churches there find it hard. So tell us a little bit about yourself, Richard, before we get into the work.
Yeah, so it's great to be here. I've been on team at King's Cross Church for 11 years or so. So I'm off on a sabbatical next week, which is
nice.
And prior to that, worked in construction. So I worked in low energy architecture, that sort of thing. And married to Emma, my wife. Been married for 4 years, coming up 4 years, and we've got a little boy, Jack, who
Fabulous.
Is brilliant, 18 months old, and isn't quite yet into the Euros.
Oh, mate, we were celebrating last night. We said, didn't we, before the podcast? Wasn't it a great thing? We've made it to the finals. You're in London. There must be a buzz about it.
Yeah, it's a good day. I'm not used to the feeling of being in a final, so it's exciting times.
Yeah. It could end really badly on Sunday, couldn't it?
Yeah, you never know how they're going to go.
You just don't. You just hope they turn up, and it'd be great to win it, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it would be amazing.
It would be amazing. It's amazing. So you've been on staff for 11 years, and you're director of operations. Tell us the kind of things that you're responsible for, my friend.
Yeah, so you've really I've actually shifted roles a little bit over the last little bit, but over most of that time I've been director of ops, overseeing everything from finance to HR. I've been the sort of clerk of trustees in that setting, and sit on the sort of senior leadership team of the church, which we call the associate team. So really the whole thing, and have moved recently to a kind of more future focused role. So we're involved a little bit in church planting in different parts of the UK. And so really starting to put the bones together of what that network might look like, and as well as holding some bigger building projects and other things in the church as we try and steward the growth that I think we're seeing.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about the church then, because you must, in London, lots of churches are doing multiple services. That must be the case for you. Tell us a little bit about the church location, because you're literally right next to the station, aren't you?
Yeah, so the King's Cross Church was launched 13, 14 years ago, which was the point at which the King's Cross redevelopment was just getting going. And if any of you have been just behind the station, it's a pretty amazing restoration of what were old railway yards into this just incredible mixed-use office, residential and retail area, which is really brilliant. And the Church of England at that time recognised that it would be great to have a church presence in amongst that redevelopment. And so we're what's called a bishop's mission order in Church of England language, which is not a parish church. It's a kind of non-parish, really a kind of startup mechanism.
Yeah.
And we've grown over that time to be a church at the moment of about 800 people on a Sunday, probably with an average age of maybe 25, something like that.
Yeah.
And growing number of families, growing in diversity, and with a real deep commitment to the local community. So we do a lot with refugee and asylum seekers, a lot with young families. So we work with Growing Hope, who are a brilliant charity who run an occupational health clinic. So they're in the building with us here. Others, and then lots with Pentonville Prison and people, which is just up the road. So people coming out of prison and in prison, and that sort of thing. So lots of work in the local community.
Yeah.
And it's an exciting place to be part of.
Yeah, and you guys do so much. I mean, please go out and check out their website and look at all the different ministries, and you guys are doing a really effective job. And the building has been a big project for you, isn't it? And our topic today is chatting about buildings, and you've really kind of taken a building and created a massive space, haven't you, that can work for the community, for the church, for hiring out and serving people in the locality. Give us a little bit about that history, because you've done quite a lot of work of redevelopment, haven't you?
Yeah, so we started unusually, probably for an Anglican church, started without our own building, and also then we're a church plant, so that we, again, probably unusually, not with much grant funding or anything like that. So really, we're launched in King's Cross, which has become, I think, probably one of the most competitive real estate markets in the country, in Europe, probably. So it's been, the whole journey's been this point of really fighting for space amongst Google or the Guardian or other like sort of major outfits, really trying to work, almost compete against them in the space race, and trying to make sure we've got what we've needed. And we've done that really, again, I think through the generosity of other churches has been amazing. So for most of that time, our Sunday venue has been rented either from another church or school halls and that sort of thing. So that's probably quite typical to some of the people listening, I think. And then have had often midweek space. We've had space, therefore, for office or for some of the different community projects that we've been trying to launch or grow. And so we've had, over that time, we've probably refurbished 2 or 3 different meanwhile spaces. So they've been spaces that are going to be knocked down in the future. And we've had them at a rent that's been affordable for us over maybe 2, 3, 4 years, not knowing often how long they've been for, but sort of taking them for whatever time we can have, and looking creatively about what can we do with that space, both primarily to serve the congregation, and then as well as that, how do we really make these useful multifunctional spaces to serve the local community, as well as looking at things like revenue generation and how can we make this a sustainable financial thing to be doing as well. So it's been a sort of an interesting journey. We've landed with the Diocese of London. We're really generous and have purchased a building that we're in now, which was a billiard hall. So it was built 101 years ago, and it's just up from the station. And they purchased the freehold, and we've then been on a fairly big renovation project trying to make it fit for what we're trying to do and really serve the purposes of the church. But that's quite a novel thing and exciting.
Yeah, and again, you can jump on their website and you've got some plans of how you've developed it and the space that you've got, and it's not a massive building, is it? You've got an auditorium of what, 150, 200 is sort of the max. You've got a couple of other rooms and spaces that you have developed. You must have had to think quite carefully about how to put that together. Give us a little bit of insight into that.
Yeah, so I think that's been one of the bigger bits of operational work alongside what the physical space looks like, has been how do we actually live in it. So we're a staff team that a lot of part-time staff, but at a peak maybe 25 or 30, including ordinands and other trainee staff. And so there's a job of how do we coordinate all of the different activities that people may want to run in the space, as well as trying to facilitate local mission partners, as well as trying to facilitate business for kind of income from conferencing and events. So we've got quite a structured, every room essentially, that we've got a document called Working with Priorities, and every room there's a schedule of every room that kind of says at different times of the week what's the priority use of this space. So we try to move away from ownership language, so ministries don't feel like they own rooms, but they're given priority over rooms for certain periods of time. The most obvious example of that is how we've used the auditorium, where we sort of coordinate the church use of the auditorium between Sunday and Wednesday night, which means that Thursday, Friday, Saturday we're open for external conferencing hire, which means we can really be booking as far ahead as we want within those parameters. And so upstairs today we've got the post office doing a big away day for 130 of their team. We've had Heatherwick Studio, big architects practice, cook food, like some really interesting sort of corporate hirers in the space as well, which has been really fun.
Which is great. And I guess then, I can imagine, because I just think about our church building and the space that we've got, and certainly not as in demand as you guys are in. But there are tensions, aren't there, that you have to kind of manage with that, isn't it? And when I first started, I was like, I've got to solve all these tensions because we can't live like this. But you realize that actually this you can't solve it. It's just something that you just have to ongoingly manage, don't you? So like you're saying about priority documents of who's coming in the space and what does that look like, dedicating certain days to certain use. It does get complicated, doesn't it, in this? And there are some tensions in that. And are you having to manage that yourself, or do you feel like the policy just sort of delivers all of that?
I think the policy is actually quite effective. We have a monthly, there are 3 or 4 teams that are sort of the primary users of the space. So I think we've got the community outreach team who predominantly have priority over the ground floor. We've got the conferencing and events team. We've got the church office, essentially the church staff team, and that group of 3, the relationship of those 3 is the key thing. So we have a sort of monthly meeting of anything unusual in the diary, and more longer term things if there's any major, often regular hirers are in a fixed pattern. So any changes to fixed patterns or days of the week, different things are happening. We talk. And I think the other thing has been setting some values of the building as a whole, which are and vision for the building, which is separate from the vision of the church. And so people getting behind a house of prayer and presence, house of hospitality and healing. And so meaning, I think, making sure that the different members of the team and the church probably recognize the value of different things we're doing, and they're not one of them is lesser or more important than something else. So I think that's probably been, and I think particularly something like the events hire business is something that would be easy to see purely in financial terms, but I think it's a massive mission opportunity, and even like recognizing the mission opportunity of that and making sure that's being celebrated. It's really important, because it can easily be an inconvenience over church activities. The other thing we do, Gavin, which has been something we've tried to improve but have never managed to better it, is a termly dates meeting.
Okay.
The whole staff in a room together.
Oh, interesting.
With the days of the week and all the rooms on a spreadsheet. And we literally talk through the term ahead. So we'll do this we've just done the September term, so in June or so. And we literally talk through week by week what's everyone hoping to do. And where there are clashes, we then are able to resolve them live in the moment. And so often, once Alpha's running, we have a weekly prayer meeting on a Monday in the auditorium. Alpha runs for a set of 8 weeks in the upper room. So we've then really got Tuesdays to program. So we're like, all the ministries are all working out which Tuesday works. Some things need different senior pastors to be at them, all those sorts of things. And we basically are like, and within an hour, we've often coordinated the whole term's diaries, resolved any clashes, and are good to go. So it's that's probably behind the scenes one of the core, actually one of the core building blocks of making the thing work is as early as possible.
It absolutely is, isn't it? You either got to have a tool that everyone buys into and regularly is updating, or that communication is getting together. And I love that. That sounds great. And it forces people, doesn't it, to plan ahead. because it's easy for our guys to go, oh, okay, I've forgotten to do this, or I'm interested in doing this new course, or I want to do something,
Yeah,
and not to think about other people in there because they're just thinking on
yeah,
their kind of ministry. And our job is to think broadly, isn't it? And so, how do we create a structure that enables people to put in their requests and be able to care for them? Because dealing with emails back and forth related to building, they get lost, don't they, in transition? It
yeah.
just,
I think we tried to structure it of having like priority bandings of things. So these events going first, and these were, and
yeah.
it became this like 6 week long complicated process that like, and it wasn't better. So it's yeah, it's quite an interesting. That's been quite an interesting thing that we've sort of now probably done it for 4 or 5 years,
And it works.
and it works, and then it all goes into church suite, and then
Yeah.
like then we work that way. But it's a way of just everyone resolving issues
Yeah.
live in the moment, and
Yeah. And so you're using some of one of the modules for the room hires and stuff like that and on Church Suite.
okay, occasionally, yeah, we're using Google Calendar,
Okay.
if I can say this on a
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah. So yeah, so we use Church Suite for our church calendars on
Yeah.
Google, but then the actual building usage we're actually using Google Calendar,
Yeah.
partly because the conferencing and event side then has a totally separate invoicing system and all those
Yeah.
sorts of things.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah, but,
That's great. One of the things that constantly comes up in buildings, isn't it, is the footfall going through your place, and for us to some extent, is how do you create space and time for maintenance? Even just getting doors getting bashed, paintwork, wanting to kind of there to be this excellence so as people come in, they do experience a safe place, a great environment. And we know, things like having the heating planned in and all these things that are maintenance stuff. That's a hard part of the job. And when you've got a busy schedule, how are you managing that? Give me some top tips on what you guys are doing.
we're just naming. We kind of name a couple of shutdown windows in
Okay.
the diary. So the first 2 weeks of August coming up for us are periods um, where we can I could think in a normal period there's not a day
Yeah.
where a room is free for anything.
Yeah.
Frankly, it's like that's probably the
That
utilization.
frantic.
Yeah, so we're nominating shutdown windows, so often something in the Christmas holidays, something in the summer, where we plan in redecoration, air conditioning, servicing, all those bigger things. And so we've got these 2 points in the year where we try and schedule everything we can, and then we do, yeah, other times I think we are then just looking at detail in the diary of can we move a few things around. And Mondays are quite quiet days, Fridays are often quite quiet days, and having to just schedule in there. And I think building up a big contractor database of people that we know and trust and like has been the other like key thing of knowing who to phone about different things. Because I think often if you find yourself an emergency call out with someone, it's actually the cost of it.
It's
It's often
huge
quite
money.
efficient, but the cost of it is when it really starts to add up. Yeah.
And I'm sure in London it costs even more. Like we've got people, we turn to for glass and different things like that.
Yeah.
Um, yeah,
Yeah.
different
And I
things.
think the other thing we've done, we've outsourced lots of our health and safety and compliance
Okay.
things. So we work with a company who essentially take on that whole, they own that whole compliance schedule.
Okay.
So we do things like weekly fire alarm checks, but aside from that, pat testing is scheduled in,
Yeah.
quarterly emergency light tests, annual emergency light tests, fixed wire 5-year testing,
Yeah.
um, biannually a health and safety walkthrough with a fire risk assessments, all those sorts of
Yeah.
things we've essentially outsourced into an annual maintenance package. So they're being handled, which is actually working really well for us. And
It's interesting. Yeah, because I know lots of churches do manage that themselves, and it can be a challenge to do that when you've got a lot of activity in the church. Trying to remember to do that and build that in.
yeah, and I think it means that there's someone. I think it from a risk perspective, I think it probably has also, and a responsibility perspective, it's not just myself who's completed a fire risk assessment or whatever else. It's actually someone qualified and skilled,
Yeah.
we will do much better. They're often a lot more thorough than I would have been, and I think that's probably quite helpful.
Yeah, and maybe that's worth considering for churches who are out there that, if you don't have the capacity, and I know buildings is one of those things for me that I can spend sort of 30%, 40% of my time a week, dealing with stuff related to buildings.
Mm.
And yet when you get busy and you get drawn into different ministry areas and responsibilities and what's the one thing that goes is the meeting with the building manager or the budgets that you're trying to kind of plan ahead for maintenance. So those things get dropped off quickly, and I know that's a real weakness for me, to make sure that actually we keep doing this. And one of the other things that really stood out to me as you've just been chatting over the last couple of minutes is the whole thing about vision. And I love the way that you guys are bringing the building into vision, because often you chat to churches or you look at their vision statements, the building is just the place where they work from.
Mm.
And it's not thought about, it's not maintained well, it's not uh, you know you forget, don't you? You come into a church, like I go and visit a lot of churches, and you go, this place is a is a real mess. Like the welcome here is, there's
Mm.
stuff everywhere, there's hoovers left out, there's just piles of stuff. And we sort of become a bit immune to it, don't we, of what it's like. How do you keep that fresh, and how do you keep that vision and envisioning your staff in this?
Yeah, so one of the people I work with has taken on a role as I've shifted role. He's shifted role a bit, so he's taken on one of his roles is really we've named him the creative director of the building.
Yeah.
So he's really there to be pushing into those values and making sure they're reflected everywhere. So an example for that would be that so the front of our building looks a bit like a cafe.
Yeah.
It's also the main entrance to the building, and it's a very busy road, and so it's there's quite a lot of pressure on how open we use that, whether some of the vulnerable children here actually need a locked door and not loads of other paying customers in there and stuff. So that's been a whole conversation, which
Yeah.
would be a podcast episode in itself, perhaps. But I think an example of that is that this afternoon we run a community cafe which is particularly for more vulnerable members of the local community to come and have a weekly point of connection, that sort of thing. But one of our values is around prayer and presence. So it's been, how do we actually bring prayer into that space and make this more than more than a cup of coffee, but actually something with spiritual content, be that a Bible study or a prayer meeting going alongside it, or how do we bring the worship team in to come and pray in the cafe space some point in the week, so we're actually like praying over what's happening. So all those they're little examples of where I think having a set of vision for the building has actually really helped and probably keeping the team pulling in the right direction, in the same direction in terms of what are we ultimately trying to do here, and if
Great.
someone walks through the door, what are we hoping they experience? And
Fab. Rich, would your values and vision stuff be something that you might be able to share with others?
Yeah, definitely. I think the King's House website probably has some of that thing, but it's definitely.
Yeah, I think that would really benefit people, just having that clear understanding of why do we use our building? Because I mean, every church plant I know wants a building. You get one, and suddenly there is a whole stack of work that you didn't realize that you needed. And so you've gone from setting up space and moving space and storage and reset it and take down to having a building in place, and there's a whole host of other things that you need to do. But I think it's I think it'd be great for that.
And I think there's even that whole journey for us, having experienced both of those. But you realize, I think, both the responsibility of a building, but also I think one thing the building has given us is presence in the community, so people know we exist. And I think as a portable church, I think people didn't know in the local community that we existed. So I think that's been a massive. That's probably for us, I think, the biggest area of growth is just actually been that people know there's a church near King's Cross that's meeting. But I think it's similarly, I think there are risks to it. I think when we didn't have buildings, we were much more creative around rental of space. So this scheduling a week was we had 4 or 5 different buildings that we often rented and used, and so we could have 4 or 5 different things happening on the same night in different parts
Yeah.
of King's Cross, and like there was a whole kind of, we never had the question of can we, like, have we got room for this event, was never a question we got to, because
Yeah.
we always did. And so they're quite interesting things, and how you can quickly, I think buildings do shape organizations, and how you even have to be aware of what shape are you being forced into by the different things, and asking if that's a good thing or not.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I love it. I think that's great. One of the things you mentioned to me privately was that you guys are doing, you've got 800, you've got 200 in the space to seat people. You're doing 4 services. Tell us a little bit about that, because how do you turn that over and keep that moving and people coming in and out, and just thinking about all the maintenance that goes in that. Fill us in a little bit about that.
Yeah, so we're really I think it's exciting a Sunday. I think there's lots of life, there's lots of energy. It's really hard work. So we're currently running 9:30, 11:30, and then 3 o'clock and 5 o'clock as our Sunday times. And we've actually got a venue change between the 3 and the 5. So the worship team head over the road after the 3 into a new venue. So it's like,
Oh, really? Okay.
it probably couldn't be a lot more complicated. And I think it has I do think it has a huge attritional wear rate on the team. So we do a lot of being quite clear on different people's roles. So what for us clergy, like,
Yeah.
how do we free clergy up for the things that they really want to be doing? So we have Sunday assistants who are kind of London living wage paid, brilliant members of the team who take on lots of the practical opening up, making sure all the volunteer teams that are there know what they're doing and have what they need, and maybe. Yeah, so I think lots of people, lots of rotoring, and I think it's brilliant, because I think our building's being used really efficiently. Every seat's being sat on 4 times a Sunday. It's like it couldn't be much more efficient. But I think there's something around that size auditorium where often between 150 and 200 people in a room, and so I think if you come to church knowing 10 people in the congregation, you feel like so it almost feels like a small church rather than a much larger church.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I think we've if we ever have a guest speaker who's well known, we don't know what to do, because people can't invite their friends, because there's no room for their friends to sit in if they did come. So they're the kind of challenges we're facing, is how do you actually remain leaning into mission?
Yeah. And the cost for real estate to go bigger is just huge, isn't it? So it's a massive investment to change. And and so you expecting this is going to be like this for some period of time?
Yeah, so I think we're considering lots of different options. So one of the things we're doing is pressing into church planting. So we're about maybe 30 or 40% of our congregation live quite locally to us. I think the vast majority of the other 60% have probably chosen to live somewhere in London that is quite well connected to King's Cross. So but quite a lot of them would be in South London, because the Victoria line is a high speed underground. So so Stockwell, which is in South London, probably 20% of our congregation live fairly close to Stockwell. So we're launching a congregation there.
Okay, great.
Which for us is partly a way of just looking at
fabulous.
Looking at how we can do that. I think another thing we're doing is around, we have congregation cores. So each congregation has a team of 20 or 30 volunteers who are invited to become part of a core and to help shape and help that service to thrive, really. So that every 6-10 weeks we'll meet with them and ask, what do you think's going well, what's challenging, what do you sense the Lord doing in the congregation. And there are ways partly of us like having equal buy-in to each of the services. So with trying to fit 800 people into 800 seats, you've got to make sure actually all the services are also as full as one another. So those sorts of things, and being quite definite with the congregation when we've did a service time change recently we went from 10 and 12 in the morning to 9:30 and 11:30 so we had two family services essentially, but that meant being quite clear with the 10 o'clock that we really need you all to go to the 9:30.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
We're going to have a real problem at 11:30 because we'll
yeah.
be too. So it's those sorts of things have been quite. It's like quite careful and deliberate, I guess, clarity of communication and vision for why we're doing things we're doing. But
It's great. And you mentioned to me before we started that you've got a meeting later of possibly taking the roof off and putting a third story on. Is that actually a realistic option as an
it
engineer?
it is actually realistic. We I think one of the things we probably learned on the journey is that getting the right architect is actually a really critical part of the project. And I think an architect, so the architects we're working with are theatre specialists who have built some of the more famous theatres in the UK, and they're amazing. And aren't they've come to services to understand what we do. They've been
Yeah,
in the building to understand what it is, and I think don't think we're a strange organization. They kind of understand us and like us and support us. So I think it's that partnership's felt really important, which means that when people come into the building here, people that know Poughkeepsie well would say this feels like you've been here for years. It
yeah,
feels like
yeah,
when you've inhabited it, and it. So I think our building's very narrow
yeah.
and very long and narrow, and it's sort of the width of a billiard hall table. Um, and so I think there's a degree of that. I think there's still a degree of skepticism about whether what would be created is either brilliant or terrible.
Yeah,
And so that's really the live conversation is if this is what we create actually brilliant or and I think we know that once we commit to it, we're committing for the rest of like the next 20 or 30 years. I think
yeah,
once we've
yeah,
properly spent a larger sum of money on a building and
yeah.
tried to make it home, I think that's probably us done. So it's that feels like it almost the discernment is this the right project to be doing, and
Yeah.
will the end result will we have done enough that the end result feels spacious and
Yeah.
serves what's going on.
I just when I spent some time in London, just the thought of running such a big building project in the heart of King's Cross, getting materials there and doing something like this it is such a major piece of work, isn't it? It
Yeah,
really is.
yeah, yeah.
If I do something here, we've got car park space, we can plan it in, it's easy, but there are just so many unknowns out there in London and getting stuff in. It must be interesting.
Yeah, so I think we've one of the challenges if we do it we'll need to face is around the how long we need to be out of our building for while we're putting a new story on it. I think if you were in another environment, you'd build it off site and
Yeah,
you'd bring it in on a big lorry and crane it on top, and
yeah,
probably at sections you'd build another floor. But yeah, we're you can't park outside the building, so you park around the corner manually carrying things onto site. So it's like well, that's one of the challenges of where we are is just the logistics of building. And I think we were talking yesterday with someone. I think if we do go ahead, we'll probably have a builder as part of the design team, almost
okay.
speaking the buildability of what we're doing right from the word go, because I think it will have a huge impact on
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
cost and deliverability of the scheme.
yeah,
Very
absolutely right.
early
Yeah,
quarter.
that's fantastic. In terms of just to finish off, really, Rich, you talked about your visions and values policies. What other kind of policies have you got or documents that you've got that relate to building that have helped you? Is there anything else that you found useful?
Yeah, I think one of the other things we've worked through has been an ethics policy for external hire. It's probably
Yeah,
quite interesting. So I think we in our lease we've got some requirements around not hosting events that directly contradict the Church of England's ethics on certain things. So some of it is a kind of we've taken the Church of England investment
yeah,
ethical policy and kind of applied that to our building. But I think we've also, along with that, got some positive types of events that we want to host as well. So either things where we feel like we're starting a long-term relationship with a great local company, or other things like that that are kind of events that we really want to host and events we absolutely won't host. But I think that journey's been like that's quite a key policy, and still events are coming up that we're having to discern.
Yeah.
I thought we had one of the political parties asked to do their manifesto launch in the building a few weeks ago, and that was a conversation that we aligning ourselves to one of the political parties or not. Those sorts of things, and learning how to handle those conversations quickly and well within the team's been something.
Yeah, I think that's a real challenge we found. Yeah, lots of people asking for building higher that you go, I don't know whether we can, in good conscience, have them on the platform teaching something that's contrary to scripture in a way. And nor do you want to get into the, into the work to some extent of having to manage this, like, can you share your content before you even come on site? It becomes a real headache, isn't it? So it is, again, it's another one of those tensions that we have to keep managing.
Yeah, and I think the policy has to be really good. I think it's where the vision and the values of the thing. I think if you're, I think all that stuff becomes really important. Even why we're having them in the building at all. There's often a missional reason that you are as as well. But I think we've often found the question back to a hirer of, this is an active place of Christian worship, and do you think it's the best? Are you comfortable it's the best venue for your event? Is actually I think people often have a higher view of sacred space than we maybe do in the charismatic wing of the church. And so even that question to some people where we're a bit uncertain they've just said, we agree, actually, maybe this isn't, I can see that. Alcohol's the other one. Like, I think we sort of say, if your event's primarily around alcohol, we're probably not the right venue for you. Like, we don't mind alcohol being, if licensing's right, we don't mind it being served. But if that's the primary purpose of your event, then again, we're not your best venue. But those, I think, if you can have conversations in that way, I think often you can, and early, before someone's advertised it and paid you a deposit and stuff, I think.
Absolutely right.
Yeah.
Well, mate, thank you so much for sharing a bit about your job and the story of the church. And mate, when I'm next time in London, I'd love to come and see the place and drop in. I'm often coming past King's Cross. But yeah, it's great to find out. And buildings are a blessing and they are a challenge at the same thing. And I love the stuff that you've built around it in terms of vision. I think that's really a great takeaway for people listening. The values of the building, why we're doing what we're doing, connecting it to mission as well is really, really important. And that we're not just seeing this as just income for the church as we external hire, but actually this is an opportunity to share the good news of Jesus with somebody that could transform. And we found clients that have come to us for a conference who've got saved and have joined the church. So it literally is a really good opportunity to serve, welcome people. Jesus Christ has welcomed us. And any other thoughts before we head off, Rich? Anything else that you'd go, right?
I think I think the one other thing one of the other things we've learned is just what is recognizing the what is in our hand in terms of buildings often is something that is really valuable to local people, actually having space that's often warm, comfortable, flexible, with great AV tech, knowing how to serve coffee, tea, all those sorts of things that actually are kind of week in, week out skills that I think we've often honed as churches, I think are really actually valuable things for building users and other people, and almost recognizing the importance of actually recognizing what we do really well as churches. And when you translate it out of that context, I think it's been something we've learned.
I think that's a great point to finish on, isn't it? We can often be aware of all the faults that we have in our building and all the things that we need to do and the challenges, but actually to stop and recognize that the blessing and the gifting that we have in our churches. You're right, the whole stuff around AV, live streaming. The church has got some really upskilled, isn't it, in those areas. We've got some really good people. And these things make a huge difference for the message of the gospel to go out. And you're right, that focus on what are all the negative things let's put some of that aside and actually focus on some of the great things that are about our building and the real strengths that we have. And every church building is so unique, isn't it? Every church building and community that we're in is so unique. So actually having a strategy, having a vision for the building that ties into with what the church is trying to do is crucial. And I think that's probably a big takeaway from today. Mate, thanks a lot for your time.
Well, thank you for having me.
Keep in touch. You clearly are a gifted man in so many different ways, and I love hearing stories and love learning from people. And I've got some takeaways from there. So, mate, thanks for being on the podcast.
But thanks, Gavin.
It's great. Thank you to Church Street for sponsoring our podcast, and we hope you've enjoyed it today. And please check out the Church Office website. There is, I think there's about 80 odd podcasts with different people's stories, different themes and topics that hopefully will help you in your role as a church admin and ops person serving behind the scenes in your church. So please check out those things, and we'll see you next time on the podcast. All right, goodbye.